The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in Singapore. I was finalizing a major development deal when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in years. Grace's voice cracked as she delivered the news that would change everything. "Maxwell, your father passed away last night. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I'd set foot in Maplewood, the small town where I grew up. 5 years since the explosive argument with my father that sent me packing my bags and boarding a plane to Asia, determined to make my own name in international real estate development. The argument still burned in my memory. Dad had been planning a major riverfront development project, our shared vision for mixed-income housing that would benefit the whole town. But when I returned from a research trip, I discovered significant changes made without my input. Diana and I thought a more upscale approach would yield better returns. Dad had explained when I confronted him. "Luxury condos will sell better than the mixed-income housing you proposed." "That wasn't our vision," I'd argued. "We talked about creating something that would benefit everyone, not just the wealthy. Sometimes you have to be practical, son. Diana has excellent instincts for these things." The betrayal had cut deep. In one conversation, my stepmother had undone years of planning and dreams. That night, I'd packed my bags and caught a flight to Singapore, vowing to prove I could succeed on my own terms. Now I was returning home, not as the prodigal son, but as a grieving stranger. The taxi pulled up to the sprawling Victorian house where I'd spent my childhood. Everything looked smaller somehow, like my memories had inflated the proportions. Diana's silver Mercedes sat in the driveway alongside 2 other luxury vehicles I didn't recognize. My father had always preferred his old Cadillac practical, reliable, unpretentious. Before I could reach for the doorbell, the front door swung open. My stepsister Brittany stood there, her face a carefully composed mask of somber politeness. "Maxwell," she said, her voice flat. "We weren't sure you'd come." "He was my father," I replied simply. The foyer had been redecorated in Diana's preferred ultra-modern style, all chrome and glass, and uncomfortable-looking furniture. No trace remained of Dad's preference for warm woods and worn leather. Diana sat in the living room, holding court among a group of town locals. When she saw me, her perfectly painted face registered shock before quickly rearranging itself into a grieving widow's expression. "Maxwell," she said, rising to air-kiss my cheek. "What a surprise. We tried to reach you, of course, but your number had changed." It hadn't. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said formally. "When is the funeral?" "Tomorrow at 2. My stepbrother Tyler interjected, not bothering to get up from his sprawled position in an armchair. "We've handled all the arrangements." Without consulting me, the message was clear. "Your old room is being used for storage now," Diana added, "but we can make up the guest room for you." Later, as I sat on the back porch, Grace found me staring at the old oak tree where Dad and I had built a treehouse when I was 8. "They've been awful, Max," she said, sitting beside me. "Since Richard got sick, they've been acting like they own the town already. Diana's been meeting with developers, talking about selling off properties." "What developers?" "Lawrence Blackwood, mainly. You remember him?" I did. "Dad's longtime business rival, known for cheaply built, overpriced properties." "Your dad asked about you," Grace said quietly. "All the time. He kept your international magazine features in his office." The knot in my chest tightened. As I unpacked in the guest room that night, I heard voices from the hallway. "Once Harold confirms the will tomorrow, we can move forward with the Riverside property sale." Diana was saying, "Lawrence has already made an offer." "What about Maxwell?" Tyler asked. "Think he'll cause problems." Diana's laugh was sharp. "What can he do? Richard left everything to us. Maxwell made his choice when he abandoned his father." That night, unable to sleep, I wandered the house, in the library. I found some of my old books still on the shelves. I pulled down my favorite, The Count of Monte Cristo. Dad had given it to me on my 16th birthday, inscribing it, "To Maxwell, remember that patience and planning always win in the end." As I flipped through the yellowed pages, an envelope slipped out and fell to the floor. Inside was a letter in my father's distinctive handwriting, dated just 3 months ago. "Maxwell, if you're reading this, I'm likely gone. Likely. Diana doesn't know about this letter or the arrangements I've made. There's a safety deposit box at First National, box number 247. The key is taped to the back of the Monte Cristo painting in my office. Whatever you may think of me, know that I always had a plan." Dad. My heart pounding. I made my way to Dad's office. The door was locked, but I remembered the loose floorboard in the hallway where Dad always kept a spare key. Inside, the room had been stripped bare, but the painting still hung on the wall. I carefully removed it, finding the small key exactly where Dad said it would be. The next morning, I headed to First National Bank as soon as it opened. The safety deposit box contained a folder of legal documents, property deeds, and a USB drive. I found a quiet coffee shop and plugged the drive into my laptop. Dad appeared on screen, looking thin and pale, so different from the robust man I remembered. "Maxwell," he began, "if you're watching this, then you found my letter, and I'm gone. First, I need to apologize. I let Diana come between us, and that's my greatest regret. But I want you to know I never stopped planning for your future." He explained that over the past 3 years, he had been quietly transferring ownership of key Harrison Properties assets directly to me: the Riverside development lands, the downtown commercial block, the apartment complexes on Maple Street. All had been legally signed over through a series of trusts and transfers. "Diana doesn't know," he continued. "After our argument, I realized she had more influence over me than was healthy. I saw how she was positioning Tyler to take over despite his lack of experience. I couldn't let everything I built be squandered. After composing myself, I called Franklin Ross, Dad's old friend and business partner. The gruff older man greeted me with a bear hug. "About time you showed up," he said. "Your dad was worried you wouldn't come back even after he was gone." Franklin confirmed everything in the video. Dad had legally transferred ownership of the most valuable Harrison properties to me through various means, all perfectly legal and binding. "Diana's going to be furious," Franklin warned. "She's been making plans based on controlling those assets." "What about the will reading?" Franklin's expression darkened. "Harold Stevenson has been Diana's puppet for years. Your dad kept him as the family attorney to avoid suspicion, but he didn't trust him with the real plan." I fingered the property deeds in my briefcase. "Oh, I think I'll attend anyway." Franklin's smile was wolfish. Richard would have loved this. I spent the morning at Harrison Properties headquarters, meeting with Margaret Wilson, Dad's executive assistant for 20 years. The offices had changed sleeker, colder, with Diana's influence evident everywhere. "Your father wanted me to give you this," Margaret said quietly, slipping me a second USB drive. "He made me promise to hand it to you personally." This drive contained more videos, Dad walking through various properties, explaining their significance and his hopes for their future. In one recording, he stood on the vacant waterfront property that had been the subject of our final argument. "The Riverside project is the most important," he said. "This could transform Maplewood, create housing and opportunities for everyone, not just the wealthy. Diana doesn't understand that a town needs economic diversity to thrive." I also met with James Patterson, Dad's accountant, who explained the complex financial arrangements. Dad had established Harrison Legacy Holdings with me as the sole owner, essentially making the original company a shell while transferring all valuable assets to the new entity. "Diana believes she's inheriting control of Harrison Properties," James explained. "But the company is now essentially empty. The valuable assets have been moved over the past 3 years through perfectly legal transactions. By noon, I was confident in my legal position. The property deeds were valid, the business transfers properly filed. Dad had methodically ensured his wishes would be carried out. Harold Stevenson's law office occupied the entire top floor of one of Maplewood's few high-rise buildings, a building my father had actually owned, though I wondered if Harold knew that ownership had transferred to me 6 months ago. I arrived 5 minutes early, taking a moment in the lobby to center myself. The receptionist looked startled when I gave my name. "Oh, Mr. Harrison, let me check with Mr. Stevenson." She returned with a flustered-looking Harold, who regarded me like an intruder. "Maxwell," he said, not extending his hand. "This is unexpected. Today's meeting is just a small family gathering." "I'm family," I replied simply. "My father's only blood relative." Without waiting for a response, I walked past him toward the conference room where I could hear voices. Diana sat at the head of the table where my father would have sat, dressed in elegant black. Brittany and Tyler flanked her, while several others were present: Dad's banker, a cousin of Diana's, and a man I recognized as Lawrence Blackwood's attorney. "Maxwell," Diana said, her tone suggesting this was not a pleasant surprise. "This is unexpected." "I came to hear my father's will," I said, taking a seat directly opposite her. Harold began reading the formal legal preamble. As he continued, I studied the faces around the table. Diana maintained a mask of somber dignity. Tyler looked bored, but Brittany showed genuine emotion. "To my wife, Diana," Harold read. "I leave our family home at 247 Maple Avenue, its contents, and the sum of $2 million. Diana nodded, as if this were exactly what she expected. "To my stepdaughter, Brittany, I leave the sum of $1 million and my collection of first edition books. To my stepson, Tyler, I leave the sum of $1 million and my vintage car collection. As to my business interests," Harold continued, "Harrison Properties and all associated assets, I leave to my son, Maxwell Harrison." The room went deathly quiet. Then Diana laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "That's impossible," she said. "Richard changed his will 2 years ago. I was there." Harold looked profoundly uncomfortable. "There was a codicil filed 6 months ago. It reversed the previous changes. You never mentioned this. I wasn't aware of it until yesterday. It was filed with the court directly by Richard." "It doesn't matter," Diana said dismissively. "Harrison Properties' assets are what matter, and I've been running the company. The board will never accept Maxwell's leadership after he abandoned his responsibilities." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I placed the property deeds on the table, sliding them toward the center. "These are the deeds to the Riverside Development property, the downtown commercial block, the Maple Street apartments, and 12 other key properties," I said calmly. "You'll notice they're all in my name. Have been for some time." Diana snatched up the papers, her hands shaking. "These must be forgeries." "They're not," I said. "Dad transferred ownership to me legally over the past 3 years. You can verify with the county recorder's office." I paused for effect, then delivered the line I'd been waiting years to say. "You mean the ones I already own?" Tyler jumped to his feet. "You can't just come back after 5 years and take everything." "I'm not taking anything," I replied evenly. "I'm claiming what already belongs to me, what Dad wanted me to have." And Diana's face had gone ashen. "Harold, is this legal?" Harold, examining copies of the deeds with a stunned expression, nodded reluctantly. "The transfers appear legitimate. If Richard signed these properties over while he was alive, they wouldn't be part of the estate. The company assets are primarily the properties," Harold explained. "If the properties are already in Maxwell's name, then the company itself is essentially a shell." The room erupted into chaos. Tyler was shouting about contesting the will. Diana was threatening to sue everyone. When the noise finally died down, I spoke again. Dad left you financially secure. Diana, the house, investments, some income properties, but he built Harrison Properties from nothing, and he wanted its legacy protected. You have no right, Diana hissed. I was his wife. I took care of him while you were off playing developer in Asia. Then why did he leave me everything that mattered to him? I challenged. Why did he spend the last years of his life creating an elaborate plan to ensure I would carry on his work? As I gathered my documents to leave, Diana called after me, her voice laced with venom. This isn't over. Maxwell, we'll contest everything. I paused at the door. You're welcome to try, but Dad didn't just leave me property and a company. Diana, he left me the truth. The morning after the will reading, Maplewood was buzzing with gossip. By the time I stopped at Bernard's Bakery for coffee, I'd received curious stares and several congratulatory nods from old-timers. Your dad would be mighty pleased, said Bernard himself. Diana had folks worried about what would happen to the town if she sold everything to outsiders. I officially took control of Harrison Properties, working with Margaret to assess the damage Diana had done. Cash reserves had been depleted, maintenance deferred, and several valuable parcels prepared for quick sales at below-market rates. She was stripping the company for parts, Margaret said bluntly. If you hadn't come back when you did, That evening, Brittany knocked on my door. Can we talk? She looked uncomfortable but determined. I wanted to apologize for how things went with Dad with Richard. He was always your dad more than ours. Why are you telling me this now? Because I found something, she said, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. After the will reading, I went through some of his things that Mom had packed away. She handed me Dad's journal from the past year, filled with his thoughts about the business, his illness, and his family. There were detailed notes about Diana's meetings with Lawrence Blackwood, her efforts to isolate him from old friends, her pressure to change his will. He wasn't happy, Brittany said quietly. He missed you, and he was starting to see through Mom's manipulations. For weeks, Diana made threats about contesting the will, but no lawsuit materialized. Then, just as I was beginning to think the matter was settled, Franklin burst into my office with a grim expression. We have a problem, he said, slapping a newspaper on my desk. The headline read, Local heir accused of forging father's signature. The article, clearly planted by Diana, suggested that my property transfers were fraudulent. Diana and Lawrence Blackwood had joined forces, claiming they had handwriting analysis proving the signatures were forged. This is Diana's work, I said, scanning the article. But how can they prove forgery when the signatures are real? Franklin's face was troubled. They've hired expert witnesses. This could get ugly. Max, even if you're ultimately vindicated, the cloud of suspicion could destroy your credibility in town. Within hours, the story had spread throughout Maplewood. Some longtime residents who had supported me began to express doubts. The town council announced they would review any business dealings with Harrison Properties pending the outcome of the investigation. Meanwhile, I discovered something interesting in Dad's journal that Brittany had given me. In one entry, he mentioned his other child and how Alice deserves to know the truth about Diana's past. The entry was dated just 2 months before his death. A week later, Diana and Lawrence held a press conference at the Maplewood Community Center. Diana, dressed in mourning black, presented what she claimed was evidence of my fraud. Maxwell abandoned his father for 5 years, she declared to the assembled crowd and local media. Now he returns with forged documents, trying to steal what Richard intended for his real family. Lawrence Blackwood stepped forward with a folder of documents. We have conclusive handwriting analysis from 3 independent experts. The signatures on these property transfers are forgeries. My heart sank as I watched the presentation. They had clearly invested significant resources in this fabricated evidence. The supposed experts looked credible. Their reports appeared professional. Furthermore, Diana continued, We have evidence that Maxwell has been in contact with disreputable individuals in Asia who specialize in document fraud. That last accusation was completely fabricated, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. By the end of the day, the county prosecutor had announced an investigation into the property transfers. Franklin met me at my hotel room that night. They've suspended your authority over the company pending the investigation. Diana has been appointed interim administrator. This is exactly what she wanted, I said bitterly. Even if I'm eventually cleared, she'll have months to dismantle everything Dad built. There's more, Franklin said grimly. Lawrence Blackwood has already submitted a purchase offer for the Riverside property. Diana could approve the sale as interim administrator. I felt the walls closing in. Diana had outmaneuvered me completely. The next morning, as I sat in the hotel restaurant trying to figure out my next move, a woman approached my table. She bore a striking resemblance to my father, the same eyes, the same determined jawline. "You must be Maxwell," she said. "I'm Alice Thornton. Richard was my father, too." I stared at her in shock. I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake," she said, sitting down across from me. "Richard and my mother had a relationship before he met your mother. I discovered my paternity as an adult, and Richard and I have been in contact for the past 10 years. She pulled out her phone and showed me a video call log. We spoke every month. He told me about you, about Diana, about his concerns for the business. Why are you here now?" Alice's expression grew serious. "Because I have something Diana doesn't know exists, video recordings of our conversations from the past year. In them, Richard talks extensively about Diana's attempts to manipulate him, including her efforts to forge his signature on documents in the past." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" 3 years ago, Diana forged Richard's signature on a contract with a contractor. Richard discovered it and confronted her. She claimed it was a misunderstanding, but he never trusted her with important documents again. That's why he started working directly with the courthouse for his real estate transfers. Alice pulled out a tablet and showed me a video from 6 months ago. Dad appeared on screen, looking tired but alert. "Alice," he was saying, "I need you to keep this recording safe. If something happens to me and Diana tries to claim Maxwell forged documents, you'll have proof that she's the one with a history of forgery. I've documented everything." Alice's evidence was a game changer, but we needed more. Working with Franklin, we developed a strategy to expose Diana's fraud. "The key," Franklin explained, "is proving that Diana and Lawrence orchestrated this whole thing. If we can show they fabricated the handwriting analysis, their entire case collapses." Brittany proved to be another unexpected ally. Having witnessed her mother's machinations firsthand, she provided details about Diana's secret meetings with Lawrence, including recordings she had made on her phone. "I started recording her conversations after I gave you Dad's journal," Brittany explained. "I had a feeling she was planning something like this." The recordings revealed the extent of Diana and Lawrence's conspiracy. They had paid the expert witnesses to falsify their reports, banking on the fact that I wouldn't have the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle. "They're planning to rush through the Riverside sale before the investigation is complete," Brittany warned. "Mom thinks that once Lawrence owns the property, it won't matter if you're eventually cleared." We had 1 week before the scheduled sale. It was time to turn the tables. I requested an emergency hearing before the full town council, invoking a rarely used provision that allowed citizens to present evidence of fraud affecting municipal interests. The Riverside property was too important to Maplewood's future to let it be sold under fraudulent circumstances. The community center was packed for the hearing. Diana sat in the front row with Lawrence and Tyler, confident in their fabricated evidence. Alice sat beside me, her tablet containing the videos that would expose the truth. Council Chairman Robert Hayes called the hearing to order. "We're here to review allegations of document fraud related to the Harrison estate. Mr. Maxwell Harrison has requested the opportunity to present evidence. I stood and walked to the podium. Thank you. Chairman Hayes, over the past week, you've heard serious allegations about my character and my legal claim to my father's properties. Tonight, I'm here to show you the truth. I began by playing Alice's video from 6 months ago, where Dad clearly stated his concerns about Diana's history of forgery. The room fell silent as my father's voice filled the space. Furthermore, I continued, I have evidence that the so-called expert witnesses who analyzed the handwriting were paid to falsify their reports. Franklin stepped forward with documents we had obtained through private investigation. These are bank records showing payments from Lawrence Blackwood's company to each of the 3 experts 1 day before they submitted their reports. Diana's face went white. Lawrence started to stand, but his attorney pulled him back down. But the most damning evidence, I said, comes from Diana herself. Brittany approached the podium, her hands shaking but her voice steady. I recorded my mother planning this fraud with Mr. Blackwood. The recording played clearly through the sound system, Diana's voice. The handwriting experts will cost $50,000, but it's worth it to destroy Maxwell's credibility. Lawrence's voice. Once we control the Riverside property, it won't matter what the truth is. By the time any investigation concludes, the development will be underway. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Diana jumped to her feet. Those recordings are taken out of context. Brittany doesn't understand. I understand perfectly, Mom, Brittany said firmly. I understand that you've been lying to everyone, including me. Chairman Hayes called for order. Mrs. Harrison, these are serious allegations. Do you have a response to this evidence? Diana looked around the room desperately, seeing the hostile faces of people who had trusted her. This is all manufactured. Maxwell has turned my own daughter against me. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. Alice's videos, the bank records, Brittany's recordings, everything painted a clear picture of Diana and Lawrence's conspiracy. The next morning, the county prosecutor announced that all charges against me were being dropped. Instead, Diana and Lawrence were under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud. The handwriting analysis has been reviewed by legitimate experts, the prosecutor announced at a press conference. Richard Harrison's signatures on all property transfers are authentic. The original analysis was falsified. Within hours, Diana's interim authority over Harrison properties was revoked, and I was restored to full control. Lawrence Blackwood's purchase offer for the Riverside property was withdrawn under the threat of additional legal action. The community response was swift and decisive. The Maplewood Business Association issued a statement supporting my leadership of Harrison properties. Even some of Diana's former allies publicly apologized for doubting me. Tyler, perhaps realizing which way the wind was blowing, approached me outside the courthouse. "Maxwell," he said awkwardly, "I owe you an apology. I knew Mom was up to something, but I didn't realize how far she'd go." I studied his face, seeing genuine regret. "What will you do now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I never really wanted to be in real estate anyway. I've always been interested in the restaurant business." It was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. Diana left Maplewood 3 days later, but not before requesting one final meeting. We met at Grace's suggestion in the garden of what had once been our family home. "I'm leaving," she said simply. "There's nothing for me here anymore." I sat beside her on the stone bench near my mother's rose bushes. "Where will you go?" "Back to Connecticut. My sister is there." She glanced at me sideways. "You've won, Maxwell, the company, the town's support, even my daughter's loyalty. Are you satisfied?" "It was never about winning," I said. "It was about honoring Dad's legacy." Diana was quiet for a long moment. "He changed after you left, became more distant, more suspicious. I thought if I took an interest in the business, it would bring us closer." And then you got a taste for control. She didn't deny it. I'm not apologizing for wanting security. Maxwell, when you've been left with nothing once, you do whatever it takes to make sure it never happens again. I thought about the complex woman beside me, manipulative and desperate, but also shaped by her own fears. Dad left you financially secure. You didn't need to try to take everything. Need has little to do with it, she replied with unexpected frankness. But it's done now. She stood, straightening her shoulders. I've instructed my attorney to withdraw all objections to the will and property transfers. In return, I expect you to honor the provisions Dad made for me and my children. I never plan to contest those. She nodded once, a business-like conclusion to our relationship. Goodbye, Maxwell. I doubt we'll see each other again. 6 months after the hearing, I stood on the newly constructed observation deck overlooking the Riverside development site. What had once been vacant land was now a bustling construction site, with the first phase of buildings already taking shape. Mixed-income housing units flanked a central green space, while the foundations for the community center and local business incubator were being laid closer to the water. This was my father's original vision, finally becoming reality. Quite a view, said Franklin, joining me at the railing. Richard would have loved this. Alice had moved to Maplewood to help establish the Richard Harrison Foundation, which provided educational opportunities for local students interested in sustainable development. Brittany had joined Harrison Properties' marketing department, bringing fresh ideas and genuine enthusiasm for community-focused development. Even Tyler had found his place. True to his word, he had opened a restaurant in one of the Harrison Properties buildings downtown. Against Margaret's predictions, it had become a success. He had found his passion in the culinary world, something Diana had always discouraged. The scholarship committee approved all 15 applications, Alice informed me, consulting her tablet. And the internship program launches next month. Lawrence Blackwood, after pleading guilty to fraud charges, had approached me with a surprising offer. His company wanted to participate in the Riverside development, working within my community-focused framework rather than against it. Why would you consider that? Grace had asked when I told her about the offer. Because Dad always said that a smart businessman can find a way to do well by doing good, I replied. Even Lawrence deserves a chance to change. 1 year after my return to Maplewood, the town gathered for the dedication of Richard Harrison Memorial Park, the centerpiece of the Riverside development. As I stood before the assembled crowd, I felt my father's presence more strongly than ever. My father used to say that property is permanence, I told them. What we build here will outlast all of us, so let's make sure it's something Maplewood can be proud of for generations to come. The bronze plaque at the park entrance would ensure that my father's contribution to Maplewood would be remembered. But the real memorial was the development itself, a living testament to his vision of a community that served everyone, not just the wealthy. After the ceremony, Grace and I walked along the riverfront, hand in hand in the gathering twilight. Our friendship had deepened over the past year, gradually evolving into something more. She had been my anchor through the tumultuous transition, my guide to the Maplewood that had evolved during my absence. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "Legacy," I replied. "What we leave behind, how we're remembered. Your dad would be proud of what you've done here." I nodded, thinking of the complex, imperfect, ultimately loving father I had come to know better in death than I sometimes had in life. He had made mistakes, we all did, but in the end, he had done his best to protect what mattered most. As we reached the observation deck overlooking the project that would define Maplewood's future, I knew it was time. The ring box felt heavy in my pocket, but my heart was light. "Grace," I said, turning to face her as the sun set over the river, "there's something I want to ask you." Her eyes widened as I dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring that had been burning a hole in my pocket for weeks. Will you help me build something permanent here? Not just this development, but a life, a family, a legacy of our own. Through her tears, she whispered yes. Standing there on the deck overlooking the future we were building together, I finally understood what my father had tried to teach me. The real inheritance wasn't property deeds or bank accounts. It was the values and vision passed down through generations, the responsibility to leave the world better than you found it. The property deeds I had dramatically placed on the table at the will reading had been important. They had given me the legal standing to protect my father's legacy. But the true inheritance was the understanding that with great privilege comes great responsibility to serve something larger than yourself. As Grace and I celebrated our engagement with champagne under the stars, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For my father's foresight, for the second chance at belonging in Maplewood, for the opportunity to build something that would outlast me. The confrontation with Diana seemed like a lifetime ago. It had been satisfying to expose her schemes and reclaim what was rightfully mine. But the real satisfaction came from what followed: the relationships rebuilt, the community strengthened, the legacy secured. Tomorrow, we would continue the work of building Maplewood's future. Tonight, we celebrated the beginning of our own story, rooted in the soil of the past, but growing toward a brighter tomorrow. Property may be permanence, as my father always said, but legacy lives in the people whose lives you touch and the positive changes you make in the world. That was the real inheritance he had left me, not just the means to carry on his work, but the wisdom to understand why that work mattered. And that, I realized, was worth more than all the property deeds in the world.